After creating the ETL framework for the query entities within the Power BI data flows, you now want to make this data available for others to use in their own Power BI dashboards. To create dashboards from Power BI data flows, you really have to load the data twice. First when you connect to the data flow, and second when you actually load the data to the view where you develop your Power BI dashboards. We set up a Power BI data flow containing the Microsoft stock prices we obtained using an API query. We now want to set up a Power BI data flow connection in Power BI Desktop that points to this specific query. In a new Power BI Desktop file, we select Get Data, select the Power Platform menu, and we can select Power BI Data Flows from this menu. You need to make sure first that you're signed in. You can then connect once you're signed in. When we select our Power BI data flows, we see a series of folders representing our workspaces and the data flows within them. We want to select the Microsoft stock prices, and we see the API query listed as a table within these folders. Once we drill into the folders, we select the Microsoft stock price data. We see the columns for the query we created. We then select Transform the data. We see the columns appear from within the query entity we connected to, but we do not see any of the actual data. The fix for this issue is actually a pretty straightforward one. We need to go back into our Power BI Cloud account and refresh the data flow before we connect to it. Even though you already saved the data flow, you actually need to first refresh the entire data flow for the connection to work. We can perform this manually by refreshing the data flow once in our workspace and then checking that the query now works. Right now we are in the entity list within the Microsoft stock price data flow. We can see incremental refresh, properties, ML model, and edit entities. It does not say anything about refreshing. In order to refresh, we need to go back to the data flow list. Now, we select Refresh the entire Microsoft stock prices data flow. We now see the last refresh updated in the refresh details. After refreshing the data flow, we then go back into our desktop file. We hit Refresh Preview, which manually refreshes this data connection. We now see the data flow query updated, so it actually contains the data that we are looking for. Now that we've successfully loaded our data flow query into Power BI Desktop, we can perform our own ETL framework on this data set. This is the second part of the ETL process after the ETL process in the cloud that converted the API query into a usable dataset. Let's keep it simple and not apply any transformation steps for this particular Power BI Desktop file. I'm going to select Close and apply, which loads the data into Power BI Desktop, where we can develop the dashboards from here. I'm going to save this data file as version 1. But this is an example of us connecting a single Power BI Desktop file to the data flow. Let's test out another Power BI Desktop file connected to the same data flow, but using a different ETL process. This can represent another user, or in our case, the same user creating a different ETL process from the same data. We first want to open a new Power BI Desktop file. We select to get data from the same data flow query. Once we connect the data, we can then transform it. This time, we're going to create an ETL process with additional fields added to this data connection. I'm going to calculate the average closing price for each year. To do this, I'm going to use the grouping functionality. I'm not going to get into the semantics of how the transformation function works, but you can check it out in the exercise files if you have access to them. We can now load this data to Power BI Desktop. We are going to create another dashboard to model these trends. I'm going to name this file the same naming convention as the first desktop file we created, except I'm going to add version 2 to the end of it. There we have it. We've seen how to connect two different Power BI desktop files to the same Power BI Dataflow to create two different data tables from different ETL processes. Comparing data flows to datasets. When you set up a Power BI Dataflow, this creates a single, scalable ETL framework in Power Query online that multiple users can utilize. They don't necessarily need to know much about how you develop the Dataflow query to consume the data themselves. They can connect Power Query and Power BI Desktop to these queries to create their own ETL frameworks which they use to develop Power BI dashboards. Datasets on the other hand allow multiple users to connect to the same data, except they cannot create their own ETL processes for their data connections. We can create datasets from dataflows, but we cannot create a dataflow from a dataset. The goal for a dataflow is to minimize the need for completely separate datasets for each dashboard but consolidating much of the ETL process in a shared location. We set up two Power BI desktop files in the video connecting to dataflows that we connected to the same dataflow. But they utilized different ETL processes to create data tables specifically for each dashboard. I then created dashboards for each of these files to visually communicate the data trends in different ways. You can see the first dashboard here that lets us visualize the performance of Microsoft stock. It's a pretty simple dashboard example with two lines on the line chart representing the low price and the high price for each day of trading. The end user can interactively change their own view by selecting a narrow date range. If you would like to learn more about how to create dashboards like this, please check out the Data Dashboards in Power BI course in the library. I also created a dashboard in the second Power BI desktop file that we connected to our Dataflow. This dashboard uses a different ETL process to get the data even though it's from the same Dataflow. We want to share these dashboards into our Power BI Cloud to see how the datasets separate for each of these reports. To share this dashboard to your workspace, select Publish in the Home menu bar and then I'm going to send this to Power BI Dataflows, which is the workspace specifically for our Dataflows course. We receive a message that the file successfully uploaded. This includes both the dashboard and the data components of the file. We do the same for the other Power BI desktop file. We're going to share it to the same workspace. So we successfully published both of these dashboard files. Now we go into Power BI Cloud. We now see there are two reports uploaded into our report page of this Power BI Dataflows workspace. Opening up the first one, we see the dashboard in a full-page shared view. We can think of the Power BI dashboards we upload and share in the cloud as applications containing two critical components. We have the calculations and the dashboard visually illustrating the trends on the reports we just opened. We also have the data supporting these views which you can refresh automatically through the Dataset section of your workspace. When we go into the dataset section, we see on the screen we see separate connections for both dashboards even though they come from the same Dataflow query when we develop them in Power BI Desktop. Let's connect to one of the datasets we just created in Power BI Desktop. In a new Power BI Desktop file, select Get Data. This time we go to the Power Platform, but we want to select datasets instead of data flows. We hit Connect to confirm this connection, and we want to choose one of our datasets. Let's use version 1. Notice Power BI now becomes a front-end process, making it a live connection type without any ETL capabilities, even though the original connector was not. Notice that Power BI now becomes a front-end process, only making it a live connection type without any ETL framework capabilities, even though the original connection we set up to the Dataflow was not a live connection. If you have multiple data tables within a dataset you connect to, you will connect to all these data tables and see them over here in the field section. However, this dataset just has one table. Let's create a pretty simple bar chart to show how the dataset connection then gets uploaded to the Power BI workspace. Select the date. And I just want the year, and then I'm going to put the high price and show this in bar chart. By showing the max there. And we just create this simple visual that doesn't really tell us much, but we want to test the data connections. We save this file to our desktop. Going to call this. Now we share this dashboard to the Power BI service again in the same workspace. And we make sure you select the workspace that you want to upload it to, and we publish it. When we go back into the Power BI Cloud, the report section now contains a new dashboard for the dataset connection we just set up. Conversely, the dataset section, because we connected to the version 1 in this list, does not contain a new dataset because we are simply connecting to a dataset that already exists. This shows how we can approach accessibility and shareability across many people and many users within a workspace. In the next video, the tutorial will be continued. Don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for watching.